So, Bree, I asked for a 5-second warning, so here we go. Welcome everyone to the first session of Sunday at the SPA National Conference 2021. Yesterday was fantastic, loads of talks, workshops, panels and so on. We're only halfway through, there's still another 7 hours of sessions today, plus our national awards this evening. So we're going to kick off with the first, which is one of our sponsored sessions this year by City University of London and their journalism department. This is mostly hosted by them, so we're going to start off with a little presentation from Glyn Mottershead, and then Jane Martinson's going to chair a panel of the other three, Kim, Michael and Navrita. So without further ado, I will hand over to Glyn, who's got a presentation.
Thanks, Ben. Morning, everybody. So I've been asked to kind of give a short talk about data journalism and what that is. Can I just say that it is kind of always a little bit daunting when I've got kind of graduates who now do this day in, day out for a living as part of the team. So Kim and Michael, do feel free if you kind of want to add to any point. I'm not going to say correct. Add to any point, please do. But so I'm just going to share my screen and then we can work through that. There we go. Lovely. Okay, so one of the things I specialize in is data journalism. So for a lot of people, they kind of don't always know what that is. So I tend to start off with this kind of slide just to kind of try and make it clear to people. We are journalists like any other, but the way we go around getting stories and gathering the ideas can be different. And one of our sources, and a really important one, is electronic data in some kind. Now, it might be that we get that from government sources, from councils. It might be we actually generate that ourselves. But we can do two types of story with it. I mean, obviously more than two types, but I'm putting it into two broad categories. And that's kind of a daily deadline story or a much deeper investigative piece. Now, I was kind of looking at one of the big awards that happens every year, the Sigma Awards, which is a global data journalism awards, and they've just published their shortlist as a spreadsheet, as you would hope with an organisation like that. I was just having a look through it this morning, and one of the things I found was this. And this is a quote from John Byrne-Murdoch from the Financial Times. And I think he's right. I mean, we've been in the UK, we've been doing data journalism for quite a while. In the US, its roots stretch back decades, but they've had a sort of access to information in a much different way to how we have. But it is the kind of coronavirus, it's COVID-19, that for a lot of people has kind of started to make them think differently. So I mean, I could have showed you a slide of kind of lots of different examples of data journalism, but this is one that's been developing since March last year. So John has been doing these daily charts. He's been kind of working out the best ways to communicate the issues and how it changes. So it's really interesting. And I think this is the kind of the big thing for me. There are times when people think that data journalists are just about nice little charts, about cool maps, about cool things. We're not. We're about stories like any other journalist. We're about telling stories that matter. We're about actually making sure people are engaging with the big issues. So it is something that you can get started with now. I mean, when I've been to SPA local conferences in the past, I tend to do a session on how you can get started as in a student kind of newsroom to actually get great data stories. So I thought I'd brag a bit and show you a couple of stories that some of this year's students have been working on that have been published. So this is a story that's been in the Times. It's by Izzy Stanley, one of the students on the course. And she put in hundreds of freedom information and requests to build her own data set. She's currently working on a piece on Vice as well, sort of branching off this kind of idea. And then a piece of coursework that made it into The Guardian, kind of a much more kind of short-term piece, was this by Connie. And she basically got open data from a fire brigade and did a nice, fun piece about kind of animals being rescued by the fire brigade. Worked really, really well. And it's kind of, even kind of early career, you can get good, impactful stories. And this is why I think it's kind of a really useful thing to be able to do. So I'm going to kind of go through a few of my favorite misconceptions about data journalism. Sometimes people think it's all about tech. It's all about statistics and numbers, but I'm a journalist, I'm a words person. I don't like numbers. It's hard and it's nerdy. Only some of this is true. And I think the nerdy bit with a kind of slight flip to it is true, because to me, data journalism is actually about journalistic problem solving. It's about making sense of things. It's about learning how to kind of take tools, take ideas and solve problems. And this is one of the big things. If you get started early career, if you start to understand what this is, it's really important. So this is kind of, as you can see, a slide, Niamh McIntyre, one of the Guardian team, again, another of our alumni, and somebody who'd never touched Excel before the course. I mean, for some of you, you'll have done IT at high school, and it is probably, I curse actually. Every year I get really kind of angry in my first sessions about how badly such an important tool is taught at schools. Because actually being able to use these things to understand information is really, really important and useful to you. And, you know, as Niamh says in the first paragraph there, as far as I'm concerned, I agree, everybody should be able to use data. It's not an arcane, strange thing that sits on the periphery. And because of that, at City, we've included it in our syllabus since 2011. So we've been doing this quite a long time. And as you can see, we've got people, as well as our alumni here today, we've got kind of people in a lot of major newsrooms actually working in these areas, telling these kind of stories, which is fantastic. But here comes the plug. We are launching a new course for this September, and it's a specialist data journalism course. So as well as the kind of core journalism modules of journalism portfolio, which at City is a kind of learning how to write, tell stories, work a patch and a district and kind of understand the issues, law and ethics, we've got some kind of data journalism modules. So for 101, the beginner's data journalism module, we've got data visualization and communication. So for our alumni, that's the one that's taken over from advanced data and coding. That would change that. We've introduced newsroom applications, which is a project, a team-based project. This is to kind of try and help students work in the way that data journalism teams are doing on big projects, creating interactive tools to explore the data. Data investigation. That's a much kind of deeper dive into the world of open source intelligence and how we can use code tools to do that kind of work. And of course, a final project. The reason we've done it is the feedback we've been getting from the industry. So speaking to employers, speaking to people who are doing these kind of jobs, we decided that actually this was the right way to go. There's also been a growth in specialist teams, and the Financial Times' editor was on Radio 4 Media show towards the end of April, saying that this actually for them is a growth area and an area that they're going to be investing in. Also, it gives us a chance to go deeper on some of the coding skills that kind of stretch the data journalism further. And for a lot of us, that's kind of a stretch, because if we come from an arts and humanities background, particularly, we might not have had experience of those kind of things. But actually, it is very useful and very important. And I just want to show you a couple of examples of stories that just couldn't have been got without the ability to kind of start to code and understand that. So you may have seen this story from The Guardian from the back end of last year about how a government department is kind of essentially making life difficult for journalists to get freedom of information requests. This is actually based on a report by the investigative team at Open Democracy. I actually did the pilot work for them in actually gathering thousands of decisions by the Information Commissioner off a website. So it involved what's called web scraping, so grabbing the information and turning it into a machine readable format before other members of their team then went away and did some really cool machine learning, kind of looking at the issues around it. And this is one of the things, I mean, it is more technical, more nerdy in the sense that we have to kind of figure out how to problem solve it. But actually, it is problem solving, just like any other form of journalism. It's about asking those questions and about getting that information. And this one, so from a few weeks ago, so George Greenwood from the Times actually was able to take a massive data set from Companies House. So that's the organisation where that keeps an eye, supposedly, on company registrations and filing of official documents and things. And George wrote a bespoke sort of search tool that allowed him to kind of get into this data set and look at what's going on, look for these unregistered companies. He's found quite a few, and talking to George recently, I think we might see a few more stories he's had there, but this was the one that they went with. And this made the front page of the Times newspaper. And this is a major thing we've seen over the last few years, that instead of being kind of on the periphery of things, and this is where I'm now kind of keeping an eye on the video screens of particularly Michael and Kim at this particular point. But we've moved away from being these kind of strange people who do cool stuff to support our colleagues to actually being front and centre, to actually doing things. The Guardian has reconfigured how it works. They're very much front and centre in their newsroom. I know that kind of Michael, and hopefully, you know, Jane, I'm going to ask you to prod Michael about this later, but with your background, having worked with Reach, and also the kind of, you know, being a founding member of the kind of a New Statesman data team, it is becoming a really kind of cool way of doing it. So just to kind of give you a bit more of an idea of what we think is important and what we kind of really want journalists to think about as they're kind of working, is this ability. But I see it this way: newsroom applications is all about working together to solve problems and inform what we would have once called audiences or readerships. We now tend to call communities because it's much more engaged. That requires some technical ability. So Data Viz and Communication works with two of the bigger coding tools that are used for visual communication in the industry. So D3 is a JavaScript library that gets a lot of use. So a lot of the interactive visualizations you'll see in the media are built off the back of that. And we also use R. And R is a programming language which allows journalists to kind of take information, analyze it, clean it, process it, and visualize it as well. And again, that's used a lot in the industry. The BBC have actually written their own sort of extras toolkit to go on top of this, so that they've got very kind of set BBC style tools. And a lot of the charts and graphics that you'll see on the BBC News site are actually built off the back of this particular coding language using their tools. And then data investigation, to me, again, this is one of the fun ones, where you're able to kind of pick a project, something you really want to get your teeth into, and learn how to bring all the journalism that you've been doing, all the kind of spreadsheet work, all the data analysis and coding into one place to kind of build a tool. And that leads to an absolutely crucial thing as far as I'm concerned: a portfolio, something that you can actually say to people along the way, look, see what I'm capable of, see what I can do. And I was really, really delighted, to be honest, off the back of this kind of approach and this kind of portfolio, that one of our students on the interactive course is already working as a data journalist. She got offered a staff job in March off the back of the kind of pieces of work that she was able to do and produce through this kind of work. So that's basically my kind of pitch and spiel, kind of to introduce data journalism, to kind of say to you, look, we think you should really be considering data journalism as a career option within journalism even. It can take you in a lot of different directions. And if it's okay with Ben and my colleagues, rather than kind of say, look, does anybody have any questions? What I'll do is kind of move over to Jane and be around for the Q&A towards the end if anybody's got any questions for me, if that's okay. I'm going to take that as a Zoom yes, that's fine.
I think if I will, actually, Glyn, I was going to say, before stopping sharing your screen, I'm going to get you to share that screen.
Yeah.
Maybe we could do it later, because, well, actually, no, share your screen, because hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you, Glyn, for that absolutely brilliant introduction to the new course, but also sort of talking about why data journalism is such a brilliant thing to do. I think the title of this course, which is How to Break into Data and Financial Journalism, is great, but it should also be why, because the finance masters, so Masters in Financial Journalism, has been at City for 10 years, but there's still lots of misconceptions. So data, Glyn was talking about people thinking you have to be very techie, but for financial journalism, everyone expects you have to have done a maths degree, to be really good at maths. And actually, the reason why to break into financial journalism is twofold. And there are two really good reasons. The first thing is some of the best stories are in financial journalism. Everything we do, everything that matters, relates to whether we can pay for it or not, and how that affects culture, politics, everything. It's not just about business, it's about people and it's about power. They are the best stories. And even more importantly, for you lot that are out there looking for jobs, your students thinking about how to become a journalist, the fact is that most people, that actual financial journalists, are hugely in demand, because unlike lots of areas of journalism, it has not been affected by the same sort of headwinds, where there are fewer jobs now than there were when both Glyn and I were starting out. If you want to actually get some money and earn a living as a journalist from the get-go, financial journalism is a brilliant place to start. So I am Jane Martinson, should have said that at the beginning. I'm Professor Marjorie Dean Professor of Financial Journalism at City. I'm also a Guardian columnist. I was at the Guardian for a very long time, of the FT for a while too. And before that, before any of you were born, I was actually a postgraduate student at City. After an English degree, I didn't even do the finance specialism. So all I would say is, but it was quite obvious to me when I started as a journalist that actually becoming a financial journalist was a very, very good way of getting onto the nationals, going abroad, getting brilliant jobs, writing features, investigations, doing lots of broadcast work, whatever you want. It's a brilliant entree to journalism. So that is the main message. I'm going to introduce my amazing panel. Nivrita Ganguly is the economics correspondent for AFP. She is in Mumbai at the moment, so I'm so grateful to her for signing up and talking to you. She graduated last summer, so she sort of had the end of the of obviously the coronavirus. Did mean that for the first year, so the financial journalism course, you also get 2 summer schools. You go a week fully funded by the amazing Marjorie Dean Foundation to New York and also to Shanghai. Nivrita was the first year where that couldn't happen last year. But one day, Nivrita, we will go back. I'm going to sort of ask you each to talk about your what you've been doing since City. Kim Dara is as a data journalist at Tortoise Media. She graduated 2 years ago, has also worked at FT Sifted and Google. So I want you to talk about that, Kim. Also a master's in financial journalism graduate who did go to Shanghai and New York. So maybe, Kim, you can talk about that. And Michael Goodyear, who was in the interactive course and is now at the New Statesman as a data journalist. And all of them have obviously, well, all of them, particularly Michael and Kim, have done data sort of as part of other courses. But as Glyn said, there's lots of reasons to do the MA in data course. So Nivrita, can we talk to you first? Tell us about what's been happening since you've left last summer. I know it's there's been a lot going on in India, but you've not long started this job at AFP. So maybe talk about what you're doing with AFP and the other things that you consider doing.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jane. Thanks, Glyn, as well. It's so nice to see you. I think the last time we saw each other was at the end of my term. It's been very interesting. I think a lot of journalism students or prospective journalism students now would be concerned, I think, about the pandemic and how that might affect jobs. And having spent the last 6 months actually looking for jobs in the pandemic and having graduated class of 2020 amidst the pandemic, I can say that, having had a background in financial journalism has been insanely helpful personally. And I don't know if this is something that, might apply to everyone, but just the kind of pieces that you were talking about, Glyn, the kind of pieces that we did at the portfolio that we built up, the portfolio that I had from Jane's classes as well. I have been able to use those samples to send it not only to, in the form of, like, let's say a business correspondent or an economics correspondent, but I was also able to apply to places like Argus, for example, where they look only at commodities and it's not strictly journalism, but they actually do a lot of analysis and research as well. So that kind of crossover was superbly helpful. At least, the kind of work that I did at City helped set me up really well for that. I did land a job finally, thank goodness, a couple of them, and I had to choose, which was, a very an unexpected position to be in at the end of a job hunt like that. And I'm currently working at AFP, which is, one of these old global news agencies. It's a really old organization. I had to actually look it up. They have 2,400 staff members, and I'm one of them in this corner of India. And it really does feel like, we're working towards this kind of global organization. And I'm an economics correspondent, so I do look at stories from an economics perspective. But for the first time, I'm working for what is actually a general news agency. So I'm in India currently, and you might have heard about the kind of explosion that we've seen. It's been very fast in terms of COVID cases. It's been very sudden and it's been very extreme. And clearly, our policymakers didn't see it coming. And even as journalists, we've been scrambling to keep up with the kind of, rise that we've seen in cases on mortalities and things like that. And covering economics and joining this organization at this time it's been very difficult to balance it, because I can't do traditional financial stories. But the one thing that Jane told us from day one, on our program, is that there's finance in everything, because I find myself now actually using pivot tables that I learned in Glyn's class to actually look at the kind of COVID health data that our health department is putting out and actually cleaning it and making sense of it, because it's not easily available in this country. So that's been very useful for me. I've been doing stories about, how crematoriums are holding up, the sheer number of, bodies that are coming in and things like that. It's obviously very difficult subject matter, but when you actually take it down to the numbers and you actually follow the kind of funding that's been coming in, what's happening with our vaccines, the kind of import and export of all this, these ventilators and oxygen concentrators, things like that, it all comes down to the money. And it all comes down to who's in power and who's funding it and where things are coming from and where they're going, the supply chains. And I really feel that if I hadn't spent that last year before the pandemic, just steeping myself in the kind of, the program that we had, the financial journalism course at City, I wouldn't be as equipped to actually tell these stories to a general audience, to a general reader sitting anywhere in the world who picks up a newspaper and has an AFP copy in it, talking about what's happening in this corner of the world in India. And I'm able to kind of bridge that gap, I think, because of what I studied on the MAFJ program.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Nivrita. I'm going to go on to Kim now, actually, because of what you were saying about, actually, it's my day one. I always say to people, it's about everybody, right? It's about finance isn't just about how a company made money and how much money there is for shareholders. It's life. So, the best stories affect every one of us, and the stories that get you awards, the stories that get you great jobs on AFP. Kim, can I ask you, because so you graduated the year before Nivrita, tell us about what you've been doing and how it has helped you do some of the great work you've been doing for, obviously taught us now, but you've worked for a couple of other places. And in fact, I think when you were at City, you went straight onto the Google News Initiative, didn't you, at the FT?
Yeah, so I hope you can hear me properly. I started, like the first thing I got out of City was the FT's Google News Initiative, which is one of the main, or like a really good way into data journalism, because you basically get paid by Google to just be in the center of a data journalism desk at one of the major newsrooms. And you also sort of do this funny networking thing at the beginning where you all go to a trip. We went to Belgium and I just met a load of other people who were also like really young data journalists that were trying to break in. But it's a good, and you do notice that a lot of people in data journalism of my sort of generation have gone through that, and it's worth, I think, just making a really good application for that if you're looking to go in. But I mean, obviously there's other routes in as well, but yeah, so I did that for a couple of months, ended up at the FT. The kind of stories I worked on there were sort of basically the journalism course, financial journalism, I focused quite heavily on the data modules, because I always sort of knew that I wanted to go into data journalism. But obviously having that combination of having done all the data modules, which you have on the interactive course, as well as the financial angle, put me in a really good position to get onto that FT Google News thing. And then that for me just sort of, the FT does data journalism really, really well. So that was a really good start to just meet everyone there and see how everyone does things. I did see a little bit of the sort of investigation side. We did one of the things I worked on was this investigation into Sanjeev Gupta, who's actually suddenly way back in the news since Cameron has been in trouble for all his lobbying for Greensill. But the investigation was done via this sort of this big scrape of Companies House, a little bit of like the one that Glenn, you mentioned before, that I think it might have been a similar style sort of project to the one that George Greenwood did. But you can basically find stories via these in a sort of investigative data-driven way via these platforms. And I sort of saw that happen, and it was quite exciting to be on a sort of investigative project. And I also did my own story or two. And then I went on to Sifted, which I got via the FT, because Sifted is an FT sister publication, and it's new and it's all about tech. And I would say that actually there was a moment, and now I'm a data journalist, but there was a moment where I thought I was going to be a tech journalist, because I thought, like, this is such a good topic. And it is also basically financial journalism in a sense. Like tech journalism is all about the companies, but it's also about the way that the tech transforms our lives. It's all about like the big tech companies like Facebook, YouTube, and all the sort of algorithms and how they're changing our perceptions on things. And I sort of thought that was an exciting route as well. I really did think for a while, like, this has set me up, this course has ended up, like, I've ended up going into tech journalism, and this actually has worked quite well for me because I understand some of the financial angles, and that sort of really helps when you're pursuing a tech story. But then I ended up getting this data journalism job at Tortoise, so now I'm back on data. And yeah, I mean, I do a whole bunch of things. I do a sort of cross between slightly researchy work. So we work on indices. So we rank all of the sort of FTSE 100, Britain's biggest big businesses, on their ESG credentials, and then we try and write stories based on that. And that, I think, is an area where there is some, I don't know, it's an interesting thing to think about, because the sort of environmental angle on business is somewhat new. Like, it's not holding companies to account on how they're performing on in environmental ways hasn't been done that much in the media yet. And now suddenly all of the publications are really going for a way bigger focus on the climate. You can see that in the FT, you can see that in the Guardian. And I'm also like working on some investigative stuff and using my tech skills. I've really gotten quite good at coding, which I find quite fun in the end. Like, it ends up being quite a nice task for me, because it's sort of like almost like doing a crossword, or, you know, something a bit like a puzzle, rather than actually, you know, churning out words all the time. But yeah, I actually work in Python, which a lot of journalists use R, but I use Python, and I find that a good way to do scrapes and to sort of do big analysis on lots and lots of data. One of the things we scraped recently was the Everything's Invited site, that obviously was at the center of that got really big for a while, and we looked at all the testimonies and how often certain things were mentioned. But yeah, that's me.
Brilliant. Kim, thank you so much. I couldn't have said better about how doing the MA in financial journalism can get you into all sorts of things, not just finance, but tech, obviously, as you said, writing about big tech companies and their impact. And also, you know, everything like everyone's invited. So thank you very much. Michael, last but not least, of our great panelists, talk about what you've been doing since leaving City and the New Statesman.
So actually, much like Kim, I managed to get into my first break using the Google News Initiative. But first I went to Reach PLC, which is the publication group that owns The Mirror and a lot of local newspapers like Manchester Evening News and Liverpool Echo. And when I was there, my job was basically to sort of break down you know, huge national data sets on a local level to find stories for, you know, different parts of the country. That involved a lot of open data, but also a lot of freedom of information requests, sending freedom of information requests to every council, and compiling your own data set, kind of like Glenn mentioned earlier. And also web scraping is obviously a huge part as well. And before I did my MA, I hadn't done any coding, but I sort of started getting into it. You've got to practice like in your own time, although that's probably different with the new data course. I'm not sure, probably a bit more coding intensive, but I barely write a story nowadays without using R, and I pretty much use it for everything. And it's a good tool as well, because you can sort of reuse bits of code that you've written before, and it also allows less room for errors. If you're working in Excel, you might type a number in wrong or something, but if you do it all with code, it's all, you know, there's less room for sort of human error. But then after a year and a bit at Reach, the New Statesman group was setting up a data team, and I think it's actually a lot of places have been investing heavily in data journalism, so it's definitely a growth sort of area if you're looking to break in, and it's a specialist skill, so it is valued. And they headhunted me to join the new team, and I think there might be about 5 people on this new team that have been to City or done one of the MAs at City, be it the interactive or newspaper MA courses. So I mean, a bit of a plug, but yeah, the sort of the City University name is really valued in the industry, for sure. Certainly helped me get my first job. But yeah, the Google News Initiative, really worthwhile doing. I think for interviewing, for things like that, it's always good to come armed with a few story ideas. And I think the way I managed to sort of bag the position was I'd sent off a few FOIs before, and I was like, well, I've sent off these FOIs that might be, you know, some interesting results, and I think they really liked them and they wanted them. And that's a great thing with FOI as well. It's kind of, if you get something back, it's always going to be an exclusive. It's not you know, using open data that anyone can find. So yeah, that's a tip, I suppose. Come armed with ideas to interviews. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Michael. Actually, one thing, and thank you very much for that City University plug on behalf of Glyn and I. We do recognise, though, it's, you know, it isn't cost free to do an MA. So you're all at university, you know, with student loans. We know the situation currently, you know, can be difficult for many of you. One of the things to bear in mind is City does have a really good scholarship programme. Now, I don't know about you, Michael, but I do know that Kim was lucky and in fact good enough to get the Marjorie Dean Scholarship for her year. Marjorie Dean, an amazing pioneering female financial journalist, pays for at least two, one in the UK, one internationally every year. So that's definitely something worth looking at and applying for if you're interested in doing the course. Nivrita got Chevening Scholarship. So it doesn't have to be, I know it's, you know, it can be a lot of money, but there are ways to try and help that cost. And actually one thing to bear in mind, as these three have all sort of proved, and Glyn, you've got a chart that will prove this, is that looking at, I mean, data, finance, anything like that puts you in a really good position in the jobs market. So you may be someone who actually wants to write about television or film, or, you know, going out on pubs, because that's sort of, you know, that's society pages. But actually, if you're looking for something that will give you a sort of a base training and a job with money, then doing something in finance, a financial journalism course, doing data is a brilliant way to do it. Glyn, are you able to share your screen? One thing while Glyn's doing that though, if you've got any questions at all, I know we've got sort of 10 more minutes, please do put them in the chat and I'll make sure they're answered. So Glyn's screen here, which I hope you can read better than mine with my aging eyesight. If you see that this is CIJN, so the journalism job market, CIJN is basically, you know, looks at all the jobs advertised. That very top, the most number of jobs in that 3-month period of financial journalism, more even than general reporter or editor. So, you know, it just goes to show, and more so, I mean, it's literally twice as much as editor or any other specialist job, and the next one is digital, and that's 20 jobs compared to, am I reading this right? Is that 50 again? Anyway, so as you can see, it's a great thing to do if you actually want to get a job at the end of this and not, you know, be worried about financing yourself or having dread of all dreads to go back and live with your mum and dad. I think Kim has just put a great, thanks Glyn for that. Kim has just put a really helpful link in to the Marjorie Dean, oh, not a link, sorry, I will put the link in, talking about Marjorie Dean and what she did at The Economist, because she's brilliant. As I say, she is an incredible, was an incredible woman whose foundation pays for thank you Kim, pays for at least 2 or 4 scholars, pays for my job, and pays for the whole group of financial journalists to go to China and New York, unless, of course, a global pandemic comes along and spoils literally everything. Well, hopefully not everything. But so any questions you have, do please put them in there. Someone's already asked. Matthew, are there any online short courses that offer a good introduction to data journalism you'd recommend to people on courses that don't explicitly cover data journalism or coding? Short courses, I mean, we only really know about what City offer, and for City we're really focused on sort of the MA program at the end of your course. I'm sure there are a number of sort of other things, and actually I think a couple of you, like Kim, you came to City with obviously knowledge of sort of data journalism, didn't you? Had any three of you, had any of you done any previous courses before City?
No, not courses, but I think just try doing it. Just try doing it. Try using data, and you'll end up Googling for problems, and kind of self-teaching, and that's sort of what I did. In terms of like learning coding, there's probably some more stuff out there rather than explicitly data journalism itself. I've not seen any, but there'll be lots of like coding tutorials and things online. And I mean, Kim may recommend Python, but I'd recommend R. But that's the it's up to your preference. I think Python's like used in more American newsrooms, whereas R tends to be a more European thing. That's what
I'm going to jump in here and say both are absolutely fantastic. And I do use both, but I think there's a toolkit that's built on top of it called Tidyverse. And Tidyverse allows R to read much more like everyday English. My kind of concern about Python for data work is you've got to learn Python, and then you've got to learn a toolkit called Pandas. It's brilliant. Oh, scraping. I'd probably argue with you about that, Kim, but yeah, it's a fair point. Scraping in Python has been the classic way to do it, but R has got so much better. It's horses for courses. People like both. I like Python. I love R. But we teach R because it is kind of really major. But the key point, and this is where I kind of jump back in and kind of smooth everything and make it nice. It doesn't matter which one you start with, because both are problem-solving toolkits and ways of working and thinking. Just to kind of go back to Matthew's question, a lot of the stuff that you'll see out there, particularly around coding, is aimed at data scientists. And when you're doing the kind of tutorials that they do, and I can tell you because I've tested them, they do not play nicely with the kind of way we work and the kind of thing you need to be able to turn it into. So, there is stuff out there, but it is how you think and how you apply as a journalist.
Yeah. Sorry, Jen.
The other thing on the thing about doing courses is that obviously if you're doing a year-long MA program, it's about, it really is about sort of getting a start as a journalist and learning all sorts of things. So it's not just, so if you do a sort of short course in something, it's a completely different thing. And I think you'll probably all agree with me that it's about the sort of, basically the network you make, the people that you meet. Kim, you talked about sort of meeting people, but I mean, Navrita, your year, despite the fact that come March, we all had to sort of go home again and not actually be together. They're all doing really exciting things, aren't they? I think, they're all, so many of them have got jobs, but you keep in touch, and it's sort of people that you meet as well when you're doing the course, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our class, I was really surprised actually when I turned up, Jane, to be honest, that first day, because we had people from so many countries, and every single topic that we would discuss in class, we'd get so many unique perspectives. We had a student from China, there was me, of course, from India, from Cameroon, from Russia, from Kazakhstan, it was Vietnam. And I mean, the kind of the inputs that you get, the kind of perspective that you gain in a setup like that, it's invaluable. And I should add, I mean, I'm an international student. I didn't do my undergrad in the UK. So the 1 year that I spent in the UK was at City. And in that short time, in those 10 months, the number of people I met from the industry, the number of people I have been able to then keep in touch with, either over Twitter, the kind of guests that we had on who actually came and spoke to us, got to know us one-on-one. It's been so phenomenal. I think the network is honestly something we don't talk about enough, because I really experienced that. And till date, I had, someone email me asking me to freelance for them because of what's happening in India, simply because they knew me from the program, and they said, would you have time? Can you send us a few pieces, because we want someone in India right now. And that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't on the course, because I had no background at all. I'm from India.
Brilliant, and that's really good to hear. Are you going to have time to do that though? Presumably you're working.
I'll have to check with my employer.
And actually that is one of the really good. And speaking as someone, as a City alum of a long time ago, you know, some of my, I then carried on working in national newspapers for 25 years, but some of my best friends in journalism are people that I went to City with, you know, who are now doing amazing jobs. One of them, I think, came and did the Marjorie Dean lecture job, which is obviously Will Lewis is setting up a new news movement, but has had an illustrious career, including being chief executive of Dow Jones. So you get sort of a much broader perspective on all of these courses. I think if you are thinking about becoming a journalist and thinking about being able to come to do something like City, which it's a 10-month commitment, and it, you know, can be costly, but there are ways. We like to think it really is a really good way to get into journalism. Right, so there's all questions in our last 5 minutes. We have got, how does an MA compete against NCTJ, or can both work well together? I don't know, work well together. I think, as Glyn said, I think in the answer to one of the questions, the MA does so much more than the NCTJ. So I think it just depends. You have to look at all the different courses and what they offer and what it is you want to get out of them, really. So honestly, watching would like to know a bit more about the courses and funding you've been talking about. I wondered if it might be okay to, oh yeah, of course, absolutely. Yes, right, I shall do that. What's the other one? Michael's answered that, brilliant, on Max's question. Are there any more questions for us? Anything about, I should say, I just put a link if you're interested in scholarships to the Marjorie Dean one, but obviously the City website has lots of details of other things. There is going to be a Q&A on the SBA website from another, in fact, from Navrita's year, Amy Borrett, who is also working, it's a very small world, working with Michael at the New Statesman at the moment. She has written a Q&A about what to do on the course and what the course does, which is brilliant. Please go and read that. I think, unless there is, brilliant. I was going to say, I will hand back to Ben Siat, but I do want to, before I do that, say a huge thank you to this wonderful panel of wonderful alums as well as wonderful colleagues, Glyn, Mortised, and thank you SBA for inviting us. And yeah, do get in touch. Any more questions? Come and be a journalist.
So yeah, thanks so much to City for that great talk. There are a couple of sessions at 12 p.m. in 10 minutes. So in room 1, so in this room, we're hosting an in conversation session with Hugh Edwards, who I'm sure needs no introduction. And in room 2, we've got a sort of basics of investigative journalism session with Michelle Teal, who works for My London. So if you signed up for either of them, we'll see you there. And you can obviously follow along on Twitter, social media, with hashtag Spank21 and on our YouTube. But thanks so much to the panelists and to all the people for coming. Enjoy the rest of the day.